Day 1142 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 929,000 military personnel losses, just staggering, including an additional 1,420 in the past day. Then as for hardware, 3 tanks, 12 APVs, 70 artillery, and 169 soft targets. Then headed straight into the map, because today's aerial incursion into Russia that is breaking the yoke of tyranny is a UFO. As overnight, this mysterious flying saucer-like aerial vehicle appeared to breach the skies over Moscow. Though it's not precisely clear who this aircraft belongs to, with some reports suggesting that Russia, spooked by a Ukrainian UAV attack, shot at its own helicopter. If true, the event highlights poor coordination between Russian air defense and aviation forces once again. If false, then the possibility remains for a Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicle, and something that would highlight Ukrainian drone and UAV program innovation going into overdrive, developing something resembling Romania's own ADIFO project, seen here. This Romanian variant is a vertical takeoff and landing flying disc, which has been an ongoing prototype since 2019, although the ADIFO project has planned jet propulsion in its future, but not yet materialized. And so, hypothetically, if the aerial object flying over Moscow skies was of Ukrainian design with a dolphin's airfoil-shaped flying saucer design, it would then likely be using a hybrid propulsion system, such as electric motors with ducted fans for primary lift and maneuverability, plus supplemented by small jet engines or gas turbines for higher speeds. Now, as this event unfolded, there was a lot of footage coming out from locals showing Russian air defense attempts to take the saucer-shaped object out of the sky, where you can see the red coloring from the tracer rounds of the anti-aircraft bullets that contain a pyrotechnic charge to light up the direction of fire in low visibility conditions like that of nighttime to help operators keep their fire on course. And yet those operators were a terrible shot. They would either be using the 23mm or 30mm caliber rounds, seen here performing small amounts of burst fire, which contrasts with what we normally see from some of Ukraine's own air defenses of a similar type. Interestingly, and going back in time, Ukraine developed an unmanned drone with a missile armament back in 2021, so therefore pre-invasion, with a more traditional single-rotor design, an impressive feat for back then, at a time of a less matured UAV manufacturing landscape. Nevertheless, earlier designs like these make it no surprise that Ukraine has essentially pioneered, revolutionized, and mainstreamed many aspects of modern-day drone warfare. Then to a quick update on the March 31 strikes at the Shakovka Airfield in Kaluga of Russia, with it revealed that a technical room for missile servicing was destroyed and another was damaged by shrapnel. Additionally, a room containing Kh-22 missiles was hit. Most refueling stations have vanished from the satellite images, making the airfield inactive, at least for now. So as we can see, whether it be UAVs, helicopters, UFOs, or airfields, Putin's long-time free pass from attacks on the motherland is over, and in less than 8 days, we are likely to see an end to the long-range strike ceasefire on energy sites, leading to more attacks on Russian oil refineries, among other key motherland assets. In fact, no need to wait 8 days, as Russia is doing it all on their own, as a fire broke out at an oil refinery in Komsomolsk-on-Amur, in Russia's Khabarovsk region. Unofficial sources inside Russia were pretty quick to blame Ukraine, but clearly one problem stands out with that logic. Because as the crow flies, this location is over 4,000 miles from Ukraine. Imagine if it somehow were to be resulting from a Ukrainian drone. Russia would instantly have some bigger problems on their hands. In fact, Russia already does have some bigger problems on their hands when it comes to refineries, because at least 3 of their refineries, including the Tuapse, the Ilska, and the Novoshatynsky refineries, have been forced to halt or reduce production due to significant financial losses caused by the attacks, compounded by export restrictions and rising raw material prices, with all 3 of these refineries suffering tens of millions of dollars in losses for 2024. On top of that, the Volgograd and Krasnodar refineries also reduced their processing capacity to about the 50% mark. Now headed to the Ukrainian map, where multiple reports suggest Russia's new spring offensive against eastern Ukraine has already begun. And as per some of the frontline reports, ground operations of the armed forces of Russia have almost doubled in the main sectors of the map, with activity in the last 24 hours most focused around 2 axes of attack. The first is at northern Donetsk at Katarinivka, a location which is actually encroaching upon both Kharkiv and Luhansk territories, with Russians advancing on this front, or rather consolidating positions in the past 24 hours. Then headed down the map to central Donetsk, where the AFU repelled 29 Russian assaults, with most of these in the past day being at Kalinova and the Shevchenko directions. And then to the remainder of the activity that was most heated was found at the Constantinople direction, with Russian forces expanding their frontline positions marginally around Rozdolna and at the settlement leading up to Rozliv. Next on the map, we saw the resulting fallout of a drone attack on Kyiv, hitting an electronics warehouse that specialized in the production of hundreds of thousands of mobile phones annually, with the warehouse destroyed during the recent shelling. The founder of the Sigma company recorded a video full of compassion and relief to say that although the company's achievements over the past 10 years were destroyed, he was thankful that no one was on the site during the overnight attack, because this loss pales in comparison to the heart-wrenching losses of loved ones. And amid all the chaos, the owner persists with unwavering resolve and firm conviction in Ukraine's ultimate victory. Then across to some news, as the European Union will allocate 9 billion euros in separate funds to bolster Ukraine's defences by year's end. This amount is separate to the 45 billion euros in aid pledged in October of last year by the EU under the G7 framework, with Ukraine receiving about 19 billion of that amount already as part of monthly tranches, received in the form of both financial assistance and military hardware. Additionally, Ukraine is set to receive another 2.1 billion euros from the proceeds of frozen Russian assets, with those funds arriving this week, although with a portion of that additional funding going to paying back the interest and principal of much of the earlier 45 billion euro G7 package. All of these numbers can get a bit confusing, but simpler to say that the majority of the funding just mentioned is very ironically leaving Russia to foot the bill when it comes to a nation's military fighting against them. Some call it sweet poetic justice. Then to some more news. Ukraine has fulfilled 81% of its commitments under the EU Association Agreement, as announced by Ukraine's PM Denis Shmyhal. Following the 10th Ukraine-EU Association Council meeting, he pointed to major progress in areas including intellectual property, education, and national security, where obligations in those departments exceed 90%. And for some added context here, most countries seeking EU membership undergo a lengthy process to align with EU standards. This involves adopting the EU's body of laws and regulations across areas such as trade, governance, and human rights. The pace varies. Croatia took 10 years, while Turkey has been negotiating since 2005 with no end in sight. Though true to say that Turkey is in another organization, that is NATO, that alliance has a separate purpose from the EU, being primarily a military defense alliance instead. Now, as for Ukraine's EU adoption process, PM Shmyhal expressed confidence that Ukraine can achieve substantial results in European integration, not in years, but in months. This rapid advancement reflects Ukraine's strategic pivot towards Europe, reinforcing its commitment to align with EU standards and practices. So this represents a significant setback for the Kremlin, which has long maintained a strong preference for Ukraine to remain within Russia's sphere of influence, or at a minimum, to exist officially as a neutral buffer state with a puppet government, and without substantial ties to Europe. As such, Ukraine's accelerating EU integration directly threatens Russia's geopolitical influence in the region. Meanwhile, in other EU news, Germany's incoming Chancellor Friedrich Merz announced a decisive shift in defense policy, stating, quote, "Germany is back on track and will fulfill its obligations in terms of defense." So this commitment signals a strengthening of Europe's eastern defense posture as Germany, the continent's largest economy, recalibrates its military priorities to meet its strategic security responsibilities in the region. Simultaneously, Italian PM Meloni expressed strong support for Ukraine, suggesting a potential future security guarantee that includes NATO's Article 5. President Zelensky praised her commitment, indicating that discussions on this crucial security measure are forthcoming. And on that note, today the coalition agreement of Germany's incoming government was made public, revealing a significant policy shift. Germany is now officially supporting Ukraine's path to NATO membership. However, membership remains uncertain, with current holdouts including Hungary and Slovakia still blocking the way. Plus, of course, there's still one other major player left, the United States, with the current Trump administration showing little enthusiasm for expanding NATO eastward. Though technically it would be more southward from NATO's perspective at this stage, with 2,600 odd kilometers already bordering Russia, most of which is a lot closer to Moscow and St. Petersburg than Ukraine could ever be. Then headed across to some lighter news, where new Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney visited a charming Ukrainian bakery in New Westminster, BC of Canada recently. During his visit, the PM made a special stop at the Kozak Ukrainian Eatery on 6th Street, known for its delicious pierogies, cabbage rolls, and freshly baked goods. During his visit, a staff member was spotted wearing a vyshyvanka, a traditional Ukrainian embroidered shirt, and as you may have spotted, the trizub symbol at the top, aka Ukraine's national coat of arms. The PM thanked the staff for the warm welcome and the pastries for the road. What a beautiful sight. Then headed across to a couple of super quick funnies to round off the video today, guys. So, the first of which, not the lightest of funnies, where Russia's foreign ministry recently declared that military strikes on Iran would violate international law. The foreign ministry wagged its finger at potential US military action against Iran with the same straight face they used while sending tanks into Kyiv. So let me get this straight. Strikes on another country would violate international law. Where have we heard that before? That is really some classic Russia right there. Performing these very same actions on another country right as they lecture others about respecting international borders. The pot calling the kettle black. Then to a final quick funny, Vilnius, Lithuania, a wasteland. As a Russian social media user claimed images of a bleak wasteland were from Vilnius. Plot twist, and you might guess this one, the photos were actually of their own city of Norilsk in Russia. Now I get that some of these ultra-nationalist Russians don't expect anyone to verify their information, but in this case, they could have at least taken a look closer at the photo that they posted online to see that if you zoom in, that is clearly a Russian flag painted on the building. Trust only Russians to use miserable examples of their own country when mocking other countries. That's our Russia. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!